on a newsletter fest high, I will say. Like, it's been really exciting to me to have people connecting, coming in and interacting. We've had some really fun conversations. All right, it is 11, so we are going to get started. I have a few housekeeping announcements to make before I hand it over to Ryan. That is, to start, we have two ways for you to communicate in here today. We have chat, which is for you to use to talk amongst yourselves and with us. And that is one little thought bubble. There's another thought bubble cluster. It's got two thought bubbles and says Q&A. That is where I want you to put your questions, because that will help us keep up with them, especially if people are really chatty in the chat and we lose the questions. So please use the Q&A to ask questions. I will be stopping, like, hopefully not rudely interrupting Ryan, but interrupting him to get your question in if it feels like it belongs right when he has said something, but we will keep up with them in case we need to come back or circle back to a thought topic at the end. So feel free, load us up with questions. We are super excited to make this not your typical webinar, but an actual conversation around the things that he is presenting. So other announcements that we've been making at the beginning of every session, we have a Slack community. If you don't know about it yet, Seth is going to drop the link to that. The Slack community is for the event, but will live on long after. There are some cool channels in there where you can introduce yourself. You can access newsletter resources. You can list a newsletter job. We promise to be respectful of you in that Slack, and are looking forward to continuing to interact and just let you know about more newsletter fest type things as we continue to offer them. This is hosted by Curated. The entire event, that's a platform that you can use to collect links, build, send a newsletter. It publishes a publication site which contains archives of your newsletter that are searchable, and it also, ding, 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 supports sponsorships. So that's kind of why we're excited to talk with Ryan today, is to bring you more information about sponsorships. We heard from Dave Verwer, the creator of Curated, earlier this week, who talked a lot about the timing of when you should actually go after sponsorships. So I'm excited for Ryan to add to that conversation. We do have two contests going on this week. One is for a free year of Curated. I haven't checked this morning to see if we've had any more entries, but like to date, there was one. So this could be a great opportunity to get in there and win a year worth of a really robust platform built to send newsletters. All you got to do is start a Curated account and build a simple version of a newsletter and post it to the contest. So he just dropped the link in for that. The other contest is for you to just go vote, because we had crowdsourced the nominees for top newsletters of the year. And there's some great newsletters in there that might even inspire you in your newsletter, but we would love to announce the winners of all of these at our closing ceremony on Friday. So that's enough from me. I'm about to hand it over to Ryan Sager of Email Revenue Solutions. I said it without butchering it.
Okay.
Email Revenue Solutions. Ryan's in Brooklyn. He's about to teach us some street smarts about sponsorships. Take it away.
So yeah, hi everyone. As Ashley was just saying, I'm Ryan Sager. My company is Email Revenue Solutions. Just give you a little background on my background in the industry and why I'm the one here teaching you about this. So I came up through traditional media, I think, like a lot of people who've gone out and created newsletters on the editorial side, started the review section at the Wall Street Journal, the ideas section at Time Magazine, and then really got into the newsletter world at a company called Ladders, which is a job search company where we created a daily newsletter product that was going out to about 1 million subscribers there. And what we did there to monetize that was selling direct sponsorships of our daily newsletter. And we managed to kind of get that up to where we were running about $2.5 million in direct sold advertising every year. And, you know, I really, along with our head of advertising sales, my business partner, really learned how that game works and how to do that. And now we at Email Revenue Solutions help other independent publishers go out, and we act as an outside sales team for people, for publishers to go sell their advertising inventory. Recently, we just launched a product, which is a database called Who Sponsors Stuff. The idea there is that the most likely newsletter sponsor for you to find is the one who's already immersed in this world, is already buying advertisements on newsletters. And so we track 200 plus newsletters and see who's sponsoring them. And that's up to about 850 sponsors in that database now, which you can register and see all of that for free. So I will just start sharing my screen here to take you through, excuse me here, to take you through a little bit about the basics of what you need to know, what you should know as you are thinking about whether you're a publisher, whether you're a sole proprietor. How would you go about selling ads on your newsletter, and what should you know before tackling that? Or of course, how to improve your operation if you're already have got your toes in the water on this. So let's see, there we go. So we're going to go over 5 broad topics: how to position your newsletter, how to price your newsletter, identifying who your potential sponsors are, reaching out to those potential sponsors, and also how do you manage ad inventory over the long term. So, the first thing to think about with your newsletter is, why would an advertiser want to buy on your newsletter? Right? You're a company, you're a sponsor, you have a lot of ways of reaching your market, and maybe the most common these days would be digital advertising between Facebook, Instagram, maybe Pinterest, maybe Google Ads. So why is your newsletter a better option? Why is your newsletter going to be more effective for a potential sponsor? And so really it comes down to sort of 3 main factors, which is your audience size. It's not always the case that bigger is better, but generally you do want, obviously, to acquire a large audience. But within that, how tight is the niche of your audience? If your audience is really concentrated around a topic like health and exercise, that makes you a more attractive place to advertise, of course, than a completely general interest publication. And then there's, buying intent. Is your user specifically, is your newsletter like about the best running shoes, and the people who are reading it are really have high buying intent? Or are you a B2B newsletter where people have, SaaS needs, software needs, or specific business problems where you're, again, have a high buying intent audience? All of those things can contribute to making your newsletter more attractive to advertisers. So the thing to understand about newsletter ads is that the sponsors playing in this space are rarely buying what's called for branding. They're not doing a branding campaign, generally speaking. Now, if you're the Skim and you've got, whatever, 8 million millennial women, then maybe you've got, a Chase Bank wanting to do a branding campaign to that audience. But unless you're at that super high volume, that's not generally what you're going to find in the email sponsorship space. Mostly email sponsors are very direct response oriented. They run an ad, they are very focused on how many clicks come through from that, how many people visit their landing page, how many sign up, how many create an account, how many buy. So it is very performance focused. You're not going to have advertisers who are very sympathetic to fuzzy brand awareness metrics. They care about clicks, they care about purchases. So your newsletter is going to have to offer, again, to compete with the Facebooks of the world, an attractive cost per click or cost per acquisition for the customers they pick up. And so within that, your ads really need to be a good ad spot that's very visible, that is going to drive clicks, and that hopefully is somewhat native to what your newsletter's general look and feel is. Apologies if anyone from Live Intent is on, but if you've probably seen Live Intent ads in your inbox, they just stick a rectangle that's basically a banner ad in the middle of your email, and it's a terrible user experience, and gets a very low click rate. They make it up on volume, but it's not what you want to do, and it's certainly not the kind of ad unit you want to run if you're direct selling. So here you have Flipboard, which runs a great ad program. And if you subscribe to a lot of newsletters, you've seen these kinds of ads all the time. logo, big logo at the top, a native looking piece of content down below. If you subscribe to Flipboard, you know that looks exactly like their content pieces, minus the part where it says promoted. And a smart asset who buys a ton of email inventory, is trying to drive people to something that is an editorial article that they've written, a piece of marketing content that they've created, and they want people to click through on that because they're interested in reading these 7 secrets of people who retire comfortably. And so chances are they're going to see pretty strong click through on something like that. And then depending on how good Flipboard's audience is for people who are thinking about retirement, they presumably are seeing good conversions down the line.
Hey, Ryan.
And so, yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I'd love for you to go back. I've discovered through these sessions that I can be the voice of the naive or the uneducated, right? And to me, that's like when you go and start to try to learn a foreign language, like the best way to go do that is to go live in that country and immerse. And then you realize like a year later, you're like, oh, wasn't I silly when I didn't understand this? But at the point, you just didn't understand it. So I'd love for you to almost back up to a fundamental and define native versus programmatic in like really simple terms, because I feel like there could be a chance that someone in this room is like me, several years ago, not understanding that.
Yeah, absolutely. So a native placement is something that's made to look like the content around it, right? So Flipboard's 10 for today is 10 editorial articles that all look sort of like what you're seeing on the screen here: headline, image, a little bit of teaser text about what it's about. So that is a native ad is something that looks like the content around it, whereas a programmatic ad is what you see, again, kind of the live intent banner ads I was talking about that you see in a lot of email. If you subscribe to like the New York Times newsletters, they have a lot of live intent in there. And the same thing, it's basically what you see on a banner ad on a website, the sort of hated banner ad that is low clicks, low conversions. People tend to tune them out, but they're just running on this giant programmatic ad network where the ads are being targeted because these giant data networks know something about you, that you live in Brooklyn, and they have a guess about your household income and blah blah blah. So those native ads are being served to you basically by robots, computers that are matching you with a ton of different ads that are in their system. Whereas a native ad like this that you're seeing from Smart Asset or what you see in a Morning Brew, these are people who are buying on a specific newsletter and want their content to look and feel like that newsletter, often sharing some voice. I think if you're at a Morning Brew or at a Hustle or at a Skim, usually that copy is being worked on a little bit by the people at the publications, at the publisher, so that they're matching the voice and tone and sort of helping you make that direct connection with the audience.
Thank you for that. In my former life as a magazine journalist, there was a time at which that was called advertorial.
Correct. So yes. You'd see that in a print publication if you happen to ever see a print publication. And
if you ever see a magazine, what are those?
If you ever seen a magazine, possibly on a newsstand, or picked up a print newspaper. So that's one form of native advertising. Another form of native advertising is the sort of thing that I've put up here. Kind of the Skim Picks is one example of this, but obviously tons and tons of publishers do this. Morning Brew does this, Inside, and all their newsletters do this, where you have kind of a link roundup, and maybe some of those links are sponsored. They usually put a little asterisk and say it's a sponsored link, and so that is usually obviously sold for less than the sort of primary sponsorship that was in the last slide from Flipboard. But these sort of secondary sponsorships and these link sponsorships are another thing that you see a lot, and that once your program is more developed, you could consider adding to the program. So, one thing I like to emphasize here is this bonus point is, especially for smaller newsletters. I actually did my own media newsletter. I talked to 5 or 6 people who run relatively small newsletters in the scope of the broader media landscape, things that are kind of from 1,000 to 15,000 subscribers. I'd say in that size range, the biggest way to find your first advertisers is often just having a call out in the newsletter saying, would you like to sponsor? The person who is in your world, who is in your topic area, is very likely to, much more likely than the average person to be a potential advertiser. So, if you haven't done that, I would say that should be your absolute first step is, just to use your hello address or set up a special sponsorship address and put a call out in your newsletter saying, would you like to sponsor the newsletter? Sponsor an issue, email us here. You don't have to have a pricing page or a whole bunch of data about your audience. Just, if you're interested in sponsoring, email us, and then you can pick up the conversation from there. And so once that conversation starts, the first thing, I'd say the biggest question I'd say we get out in the world is pricing. Pricing is tricky, but there are definitely some industry conventions to be aware of. And I'm going to walk you through some math. I apologize. That will, I think, give you at least a way to ballpark what you think you should charge.
Should we all get out like a notepad and a pencil? And
you could take a note. There is math.
Okay. Hit me with some math acronyms.
This was some math, or I can put it in the Slack later. Again, the metrics that matter for everything are list size, open rate, and ad click-through rate. Now, you might not have an ad click-through rate, but we'll get to that in a second. So the first method to think about, let me back up. So there's two methods. These are back of the envelope. These are to give you a ballpark and to understand how the person on the other end of this transaction is going to be doing their math when they look at your numbers. And these two methods should largely converge. I would calculate it both ways and see if they're close. So the first one is cost per thousand, a CPM basis. So what that means is CPM equals cost per mil, cost per thousand people on your email list. Just walking through a very simple example here. If you have 100,000 subscribers, then divided by 1,000, obviously that's 100. And then if you're charging a $5 CPM, and we recommend kind of a $5 to $10 CPM as a good starting point for any newsletter, you multiply that $5 CPM by how many thousands. So that would be $5 times 100. If you have this 100,000 newsletter, you might charge 500 for one ad, one run in your newsletter. Now, to get to a price a different way, you could try to estimate how many clicks your sponsor is likely to see. And that's called cost per click. And so, taking this $100,000 list again, $100,000 subscriber list again.
I like the $100,000 list.
$100,000 list. $100,000 subscriber list. Taking that same list, assuming you have a relatively average open rate of 30%, that means you'll get 30,000 opens on average opening your newsletter. Say that you get a healthy 2% click-through rate on your ad, and I think that's 1 to 2% is a pretty reasonable assumption for almost any newsletter. That means you'd end up with about 600 clicks per newsletter on your sponsor. And so a lot of sponsors, we deal with sponsors day in and day out, and like a really good rule of thumb is $1 a click, at least for normal consumer products, is a pretty good rate. They'll be happy if they're paying $1 per click to their landing page. So take that target if you want to be paying $1 a click, say you're getting 600 clicks a send, so that works out to about $600. So as you can see, these two ways of figuring it come out pretty close. 500 in the CPM version, 600 in the CPC version. So I think you would know in that case that around $500 is a very reasonable rate for that newsletter. And of course, you can plug in your own stats and do this math. As a rule of thumb, I would just say if your newsletter is small and you do this calculation and you get like an answer of like $6, I don't think that means you should sell your newsletter for $6. I think that you probably can set a floor of $50 to $100 for most newsletters, without anyone thinking you're crazy. I wouldn't go below those numbers, even if this calculation gives you a number that's super low.
Mm-hmm.
But if your newsletter is above 10,000, you're probably not going to end up in that with that kind of number. So again, pricing is always the trickiest thing. Newsletter creators, anyone kind of selling something for the first time, can be shy about it, uncomfortable asking for money. Obviously, just value your product. You've created something valuable, and you should feel confident in that. That said, you want to start lower and work your way up. At the beginning, it is a lot easier, a lot better to just be getting your ad slot full. It sends a signal to anyone who opens your newsletter that this is a valuable piece of real estate. Somebody paid to advertise here. They don't know that somebody paid $50 to advertise here. They just see that there's an advertisement. So always feel fine to settle for a lower price at first, and once you're filling that newsletter at that price, then you say, oh man, I'm booked out through June, but in July I can do it at $200, and then just keep working up that value chain. And you're always going to need to be able to do the math the way I was just showing you from the sponsor's side. You've got to think about, why are they spending money and what are they getting for their money? And sponsors will be really pretty transparent, I found, post-campaign about like how many clicks they got and how their funnel works, how their marketing funnel works. And so you can often take that information and say, get an idea that a click is worth X dollars to this sponsor. I know I'm sending them X clicks, Y clicks, and so this is what X times Y equals. So another thing to think about here is that you don't generally want to be selling each individual newsletter as a standalone. If you have a daily newsletter, that gets crazy. If you have a weekly newsletter, it's fine, but you could also sell in blocks of 2 or 4 to sell a month at a time. And you can sell 10, 15 runs at a time with a bulk discount. And that is, once you've had a sponsor run once or twice, that can be really attractive to them if they're seeing results they like, to just lock in 10 runs at a nice price. Great for you, great for the sponsor. And it helps just build these long-term relationships.
So we had a question come in that I think I know how to answer this for Curated, but I'd love just your example of what math to do for how do you get that ad to click ratio?
How do you get the ad CTOR? Okay,
yes.
So the math there is that it's the number of clicks divided by the number of opens. Is that what Curated calculates it?
We can get a little more granular than that because of the categories that this system is set up on. So if you have a sponsorship category, then you can see, basically you can do the math on the clicks of the links in that category versus the number of people it was sent to. And so you can kind of extrapolate it from there. But that's a good question. Do people generally calculate that based on all clicks, like their click rate, or are they focusing in on how often ads are clicked when they give that number?
The number your advertiser is interested in is the ad click-through rate.
Mm-hmm.
Clicks on the content, because to be just brass tacks, they don't care that people clicked on the editorial content, because while that's a wonderful metric for you and for me in the business to show that our audience cares about what we're writing about, it doesn't do anything for the sponsor. So I think I used a piece of jargon without explaining it. Ad CTOR might have been on one of those slides. So that's click to open ratio. You want to know how many people clicked on the ad as a ratio against how many opens you had. You don't have to calculate it against your list size, or you'll end up with a really super small number. You want to divide it by your opens, not by your list size.
Okay,
But
so
when an advertiser may ask for your ad CTOR, and that's what that would mean.
everybody write that down. That's your new, I told you we were going to have some math acronyms come up today. So we have an anonymous attendee asking a question, and that is, what is your take on the cost per opens pricing approach? Someone working on a newsletter ads recently suggested the following. We see that most newsletters charge between a $25 to $80 CPO.
I would say I don't see it priced that way very often. I mean, sure, you can calculate that number, but I have rarely seen a sponsor talk about it in that way, and I've rarely seen newsletters price it that way. Not to say no one's doing it. If this is a field that is less standardized than a lot of print ads and a lot of website ads. So you'll definitely see different practices. There's definitely some winging it in this field. But I would say it's uncommon to the point where I would have to start doing some math to even how those rates, if that's a good rate or a bad rate. I've not really seen it calculated that way in most places.
Thank
To
you.
back up to another question that nobody asked, but somebody might ask. So say you've never run an ad. Say you've never run ads and you want to come up with an ad CTOR. The thing I would do is do swaps. In that case, like newsletter swaps for partnership building. Use the type of spot that will be your ad spot and just use it as a swap with another newsletter. Call that an ad. That's your ad CTOR. With the clicks on that can be used to calculate your ad CTOR. That's the only way I can really come up with creating one, because I don't think it's legitimate to use your content clicks for the ad CTOR, because again, that doesn't tell you anything.
So then when you do that, do you need to be mindful of aligning it with what your audience's buying intent or interest intent might be in that situation, because you want to attract advertisers, obviously, who align with your content?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great point. If you're trying to sell to finance sponsors, you're probably going to partner with a finance-ish or at least adjacent newsletter. And I think that's, totally legitimate, click-through rate to use. I mean, it is an ad, it's just paid for in kind. So there's, it's not really, obviously it's a little bit of faking it till you make it, but it's also newsletters pay for ads all the time to advertise themselves. So, I mean, if you read newsletters a lot, you see how much the Morning Brew buys on other newsletters. So, and 1440 does a ton of that. I mean, it's a totally legitimate way to calculate that, in my opinion. So, and it's the only way you're going to get a number before you started running tests, which isn't to say you can not have an ad CTOR and get a sponsor in to do some first tests and then just use that as your ad CTOR. It's not that huge a chicken and egg problem. As long as you have an audience the advertiser finds useful, they're not going to be like, oh, well, you've never run an ad before, we're not touching this. I mean, I've never seen that happen. It's just nice to have an ad CTR when you can get something to give a basis for it. Okay.
Got it.
So that brings us to identifying potential sponsors. So to do that, you want to kind of understand what your space is, which sounds obvious, but then sometimes if you haven't gone out to the market yet and you start really thinking about it, what is my space? So that can be a real question. And so you may find when you ask that question that you actually need to define it better and spend a month running your newsletter and pivoting a little and making sure that you've got a really defined space. Then you want to find your neighbors, as I call it. Who else is in this space? Subscribe to absolutely everything. And then that gives you obviously you'll start seeing who's advertising on your neighboring publications. So, another way, there's obviously a lot of marketplaces popping up. I think within the industry, it's almost sort of a joke how many marketplaces are launching every week. But some of the more developed ones are Hecto, where you can list your newsletter for slots that people can purchase off the rack. Letterwell is a big directory. I believe they've also started offering a service where you can buy things off the rack. And Letterhead is another very developed network. Letterhead is part of Where Us, which runs a bunch of local and other niche publications, and also has a marketplace element. And then, of course, there is our new tool, which I won't bang on about, but we do have our tool to help find sponsors, and there are other products in the space. And so another little bonus tip, a thing we did a lot when I was working at Ladders, is kind of engineering your social media feed, right? Find every Instagram account related to what you're doing. Are there, obviously, are there big publications? Are there newsletters? Are there meme accounts in your space? And if you're in finance, there's 1,000 meme accounts, out there about Wall Street bets and all the different things that have grown up in that space. And so what you'll see once you've trained your algorithm, what space you're in is it will start sending you the relevant advertisers who are targeting, say in that case, finance, or targeting health, or targeting publishing businesses. You can surface a lot of sponsors, new sponsor names, just by engineering your personal social feeds to start feeding them to you. And then just note them down somewhere, screenshot them, and then go look them up later. I will say, to take a step back, this is a little bit harder road than tracking who's sponsoring on other newsletters, only because these are people who maybe have committed their whole budget to social. So, that can be advertisers who aren't used to advertising on newsletters will have a lot of questions and will be a tougher initial sell. It's not to say they can't be sold, but it's definitely, if they aren't used to the space, it's pretty different from other media buying. It's a pretty unique animal. So say you've identified a bunch of sponsors, you've created a list, you've got contact information. This is where, it is a lot of persistence and a lot of elbow grease. You've got to find the right person to reach out to. You've got to create emails to reach out to them with. You have to be persistent in reaching back out to them and learning to communicate your newsletter's value. And so, finding the right person to reach out to, that is kind of the core function of what we do at Who Sponsors Stuff. But you can also go to LinkedIn and do a lot of sleuthing on LinkedIn. There are tools of varying quality that will give you email addresses at companies. You can try and find email addresses to companies. Sometimes those programs are kind of guessing the addresses, which sometimes is correct and sometimes isn't. And then you may want to get set up with a customer relationship management platform, a CRM, if you've heard that term bandied about. HubSpot has a lightweight free one. There are some other ones out there in the world. You can pay a lot for like a Salesforce product, but there's also some lightweight ones that anyone doing their own email outreach will probably suffice for your needs. And you write what's called if you're going to automate it, you write what's called a cadence, which is a series of emails that will fill in using logic, right? It will be dear, or hi, first name, and then maybe you have a little more personal thing that you want to add to each person about something about their product to make it a little more personalized. And then you send that, and then the CRM software looks at who opens it, it tells you who clicks on it. If somebody responds to you, then you just take it over in person. If they don't respond to you, it will have you set automated rules. Reach out again in 2 days, and then send this email that you build. You've probably you may have been on the other end of one of these sort of campaigns. It's sometimes very easy to recognize, but it is effective, and it's a big part of how you do this kind of selling in bulk. If you've made a list of, say, 100 sponsors you want to reach out to, that's going to get really tough to do by hand. So a lightweight CRM is something to definitely think about. Again, HubSpot has a free version. So to back up a little, the right person, you rarely want to use like the info a company name or hello a company name. At really small companies, that may work because it may be going to the founder. So we definitely have people that we find in our database where that really is the address. I mean, it's really a two-person company, and the hello address is going to both founders, and great. But other than that, you are going to have to dig through and sort of understand who's responsible for doing the digital ad buy, and that's usually going to be somebody with a title along the lines of a marketing manager. You except at a very small company, you don't want to reach out to like the CMO, the chief marketing officer. That person may be way up the food chain from the person you want to speak to. So you have to kind of do a little sleuthing and understand the company's shape to understand who might be in a position with a marketing budget at their fingertips that they can just press, especially for email for a small test. Just say, yeah, sure, we'll try $500 on this newsletter. Again, persistence. If you send a cadence with 3, steps to 30 companies, you may get 1 response out of that. So don't be discouraged if that's what you get. I think that would be a very normal result. And so that's just worth understanding when you try and do this in bulk, what your response rates might look like. And then, think about how to think about it from the sponsor's point of view. They get this cold email. Why would they buy on this particular newsletter? They're going to care brass tacks, size, engagement. Can you show that you have a strong open rate? If your open rate is way above the industry average, if you have a 60% open rate, that's going to look really great. That's where you can mention your click rate, even if it's not the ad click rate. I mean, it is good to show that this is an audience that's really reading, that's really engaged on the topic. And then hopefully you have a good fit with their product. I mean, if you're doing a personal finance letter for millennials, you're going to have a great fit with that finance company that's trying to reach millennials with an alternative investment product or a bank account or a credit card. So you do want to make sure when you can to have a good fit with the product. Of course, sometimes you're doing a general news roundup, and maybe you have a great general news roundup that has 200,000 subscribers, and that size list, even general interest, is going to be able to find ads. Another thing is, if you've run some ads, or once you've run some ads, you'll also get a sense of what your audience responds to. You'll say, gee, my audience clicked like crazy on health, but they didn't care about finance. And then you can take that data out to your health advertisers and say, your potential advertisers, and say, our audience is just obsessed with health. They're obsessed with fitness. This is why they'd be perfect for you.
Do you recommend at that point also, once you have some previous sponsors, to treat that like social proof and do some screenshots or something of people that they might recognize, or entities they'll want to be amongst the ranks of?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can definitely, I'm not a big proponent of having a deeply built out sales page, which I can back up on that question. But you can definitely say, sponsors have included, and have a list of people who've sponsored your newsletter. You can certainly mention that in an outreach email. Previous sponsors include, that kind of social proof is tremendously powerful. So that's a great thing to think about. And you can build out case studies. You don't want to get too far into giving numbers that are sort of proprietary if you've dealt with a client. So if you want to make up like a PDF case study of a client, you would really need to ask their permission to do that. But you can definitely say, Bose headphones advertised with us and they just did tremendously. And I think you can speak in general terms about that. If you're going to distribute anything and it's getting into detail, I just would not do that without clearing it with the sponsor. And you can even cut them a little break, 20% discount on future ads if we can start trying that as a case study, and that's probably a good deal for both of you. Another thing you can do in this sort of social proof vein is use a a referral or a giveaway, program as a first step with a sponsor, right? Okay, you've got a music related newsletter. Bose agrees to give you a couple pairs of headphones to give away in a contest. That's maybe a lighter commitment, probably coming out of a different budget than marketing spend. But if they see your audience is super into that, then maybe they buy an ad the next time. So it's a way to get companies in your newsletter to create social proof for other sponsors, and a way with that sponsor to possibly sell them an ad sort of through the back door. And so, yeah, as I was talking about, I think that CRM is a much deeper topic. How to use one is a much deeper topic that we can get into today. But that is something, if you're thinking of really starting up an aggressive sponsorship campaign, you're going to want to learn all about this. And whether you use HubSpots or not, they have a ton of educational material on how to do this. And one thing we always emphasize to clients is that in terms of like metrics and things you're giving to sponsors, less is always more. You don't want to just give them a barrage of facts and, oh, well, we know that 10% of our audience lives in this metro region and they have an income of blah, blah, blah. Just keep things extremely, extremely simple. We have an open rate, this sort of open rate, this sort of click rate, and our audience, if it's really favorable, mention our audience has a household income of above 150K or something. I mean, if you've got a great household income number, throw that in there. But I wouldn't get detailed on geography. And if your audience is not all US based, I wouldn't get into that unless somebody asks, because that we've found with advertisers that if you even mention that 10% of the audience is overseas, though that will obviously have almost no impact on their performance, it just starts raising questions and it just starts a conversation that you don't want to be involved in. Now, I mean, look, if 90% of your audience is international, you better say that up front. But I wouldn't get into a lot of detail unless it's super significant. And so that gets us into, like, once you've run a few ads, you've found a few sponsors, now you've got an inventory that you want to manage over the long term for long-term success. This is where it's a delicate balancing act as far as what you're publishing. I'd say, I'm guessing here, but maybe most people here are probably doing a weekly. If they're not at a big publisher, they're probably not doing daily. So, a weekly inventory is a little harder to manage than a daily, because the daily gives you a lot of shots, right? A lot of bites of the apple. You can test 5 different sponsors in 5 days and find out who works and who doesn't. With a weekly, you have sort of less bites of the apple to figure out to do that testing. So that is definitely something you have to manage. Good thing about a weekly, you can fill. If you're doing any outreach and your rates are right, you should be able to fill a weekly sponsorship and have 100% fill rate. So the first, you want to get that fill first, and then build the rates as you go. And so, hopefully you create a nice virtuous cycle where you start off with a reasonable rate, you get a social proof that the ad's effective, you're able to create case studies, use those case studies to come back and get a bigger deal, rinse, repeat, and just keep climbing that value chain. And then hopefully that money is also giving you money to go back and invest in audience and product. And all of this can create a very nice virtuous cycle. And so that is where I'll stop. So we have lots of time for questions. And I'll just put this up that we do have a discount for Newsletter Fest people. I'll stick that in Slack later too.
Thank you for doing that. Smart thinking. He's so strategic. Okay, so we had Dean ask a question in the Q&A, and I was going to bring him on, but then he had to drop. So I'm going to ask his question and then send him the link to this specific point in the video so that I don't feel like I've done him a disservice by waiting to ask his question, which was, we run fixed rate pricing per campaign, and the key metric is gated content download at the client landing page. They like our vanity metrics, but conversions are key for them. What's best practice thinking about measuring bot or BOT clicks against unique clicks?
Hmm. So that's a tough one. If they're getting downloads at the sponsors page, then it really is on the sponsors side to be checking bot clicks. There's not really a ton most email platforms are going to give on the publisher side that would allow us to track anything that's happening over on the sponsors page. I would say that, bot clicks are really not super common on email as far as I've found. I mean, Ashley, working kind of ESP, you may know more about this than I do. My general sense is there's definitely spam and bot signups. That's a huge problem for anyone in the industry. That's why we use reCAPTCHA and double opt-in sometimes. So that's why list size isn't always the best metric, because list size can have, list size can be anything. It can be a badly managed audience that has a lot of inactive people. It can be a fine audience that still has inactive people. It can be bots and spam if you're really not paying attention. And then, what really matters is the open rate and how many eyeballs are on that content every week or every month. But I couldn't say, there are bots clicking on every link. Absolutely, you see that, where there's automated, whether it's email spam checkers that are clicking every link in your newsletter. I'm sure we've all seen this looking in the back end, like that account that clicks every link. It's probably some sort of automated behavior. As far as like how that affects ad CTOR, ad click-through rate, that's going to be a rounding error. I mean, that's not significant enough to throw off those numbers. So I wouldn't worry a ton about bot traffic. You have a lot worse bot problems on ad networks on the open web, and Facebook has huge problems with video view metrics and things. But email, I've not seen. I'd say I've actually never gotten that question from an advertiser on email about. And they might have asked about bots, but they've never suspected that a campaign that's been run has had any bots. They might ask that up front before they run, but I've never seen anyone come back and say, this looks weird. What happened here?
Right. I think that the very fact that the question is being asked loops back to the first thing you said, which is making sure that you have some guardrails set up to minimize that issue. So double opt-in, because really someone should be wanting to advertise to someone who wants to read your content, right? Like those are all the perfect alignment kind of things you should be looking for. And then I will say that Curated improved our CAPTCHA to reduce this problem when it was an issue at one time, and that it has done wonders for people who did have trouble with that. So I am going to say that is answered, and we'll move on to Deb. Deb, would you like to come on to ask your question? Give her a second to respond. We say that this feels like The Price is Right.
Right. Well, our class being called on.
Yeah. Like, come on
well, I guess
down.
you've raised your hand. You've asked.
You're the next contestant on who sponsors stuff. If Deb wants to come on, Deb says no, thank you. So I'll ask her question. Oh, and sorry, Deb, your answer was far below what my screen was showing me. Do you recommend a minimum list size before reaching out to sponsors?
I would say that a minimum is tough to set, because I've seen people, again, I was kind of very specifically interested in this question about a month or two ago, and asked a bunch of people in some of the Facebook newsletter groups and talked to a bunch of newsletter proprietors. And I'd say down to 500, plenty of people have sold sponsorships, where I think a lot of people with a list of 500, 700 might say, oh, I can't sell sponsorship. And look, I'm sure people with lists of 200 have sold sponsorships. So, I wouldn't have a list of 500 people and then go start pitching Chase Bank your newsletter. I think that would be a bad use of your time. But if you're, running something for entrepreneurs, and you reached out to, I'm forgetting the name of this advertiser, but they're in our database, like this little mini MBA course. Yeah, I'd reach out to that guy who's like a sole proprietor who advertises and with a list of 500, sure. I mean, absolutely. It also matters how concentrated and how niche what you're doing is. If you're doing a sort of B2B space, you solve a specific problem for entrepreneurs, people who are startup founders, and you have 500 startup founders on your list, 200 startup founders on your list. I mean, honestly, 50 startup founders on your list. I think if you're pitching to a product that wants to reach those people, there's no minimum, and you just have to start kind of figuring out what the math is on what the potential worth of your newsletter is for them. If it's something where if it's an audience where people are selling a SaaS product where people pay a $10,000 a year license for some, super high-end SaaS thing. Well, that's not a high-end SaaS, but if something where a sale is worth $10,000 and you charge $50 or $100 for an ad to reach 50 or 100 people, I don't think you're out of line. I think that you just have to sort of figure out what's a good customer acquisition cost for the potential sponsor, and how does your rate play into that. So, I mean, the short answer is no. If it's a general interest news roundup and you've got 250 people, you probably have a ways to go before you can really try to monetize that through ads. But that's not to say you couldn't put in classified ads. That's not to say you couldn't try, newsletter swaps. There's plenty of things you can do.
I think one good thing to note right here is that I feel like Dave Verwer said it best, but he kind of promoted, and it's probably because it was what his journey was, is making sure to build trust with your audience before bringing in sponsors, or if you are injecting them earlier, making sure that they highly align with what your audience might be open to, so that you are kind of publishing in the service of the reader versus the sponsor, and creating that balance.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And you want to see good performance, right? You don't want to take an audience that is college students and try and sell them and put an ad in for retirement products. You're just going to get no response. You're going to get horrible results. The audience is going to say, what is this? So that's how the kids talk.
Right. We can go ahead and stop the screen share if everyone's gotten that discount code off. And it'll be shared in the Slack and then available on the YouTube. There's an anonymous question. People are getting smart. They don't want me to call them by name. Anyone who this is going to be live and up on YouTube and available. If anyone has like a spot that they want edited out, last names are not involved right now, but if you come on or something like that, just let us know and we can change that. We can do some editing and re-upload it. I'm not interested in outing anyone's personal numbers or anything going on. So our larger brand newsletter sponsorships typically sourced brand direct or via a media agency?
That is a great question. My partner in my philosophy is very much to avoid agencies. The agency process is just a nightmare. It's a sales cycle is can be a year plus. I mean, you'll have RFPs, requests for proposals, that the agencies will put out to different brands. You're competing with everyone submitting an RFP. So yeah, I mean, if you are Chase, one of the Chase banks of the world, a lot of the big banks, they are going to be buying most of their media through an agency. And honestly, for smaller newsletters, it's just not likely to get in that door. And going through an agency, again, is going to be kind of a nightmare process. It's probably not going to be something your company or yourself as a sole proprietor is set up to do. So, but that's the truest, biggest brands in the world. I would say, if you look at direct sold ads as opposed to programmatic, not the stuff you see coming through live intent, the little live intent or power inbox tag, stuff you see that is direct sold, that looks like the Flipboard ad I put up earlier, that is a native ad, chances are almost always that is direct sold to somebody in the marketing department at that company at a smart asset. That's direct sold. They may work with an agency for some things, but that's direct sold. Points guy, everything in the kind of credit card space, direct sold. We direct sold tons of that stuff at Ladders, and you can get person on email, person on the phone, and sell directly to them with the right contact. And so I would, as any smaller publisher under $1 million, I would stay far, far away from trying to pitch agencies or get involved in the agency process. I think that is going to be a nightmare. The good news is that almost everything you see on email is being direct bought by somebody in a marketing department with a marketing budget at these companies. So much email advertising that you see is DTC, direct to consumer. These brands that are of the new age of commerce here that don't have big department stores and don't have huge overhead. They are direct to consumer content brand, commerce brands, and they are buying direct. Almost everything you see has probably been bought direct, is the good news.
So Felista had a question, if you want to come on. If not, I will ask. I'm going to take the hesitation as an if not. All right, so do tools like Who Sponsors Stuff show potential sponsors who might advertise outside America, Western countries? Trying to think of a workable tool for an African country.
Sure. I'll say our tool is very US focused. The newsletters we're tracking are a US audience. There are definitely global brands in there that, and at other products I've seen like ours, it is typically US focused. That's not to say that, a lot of, especially like software products and products aimed at a tech audience are selling globally. So those sponsors would all work globally. But if it's, consumer brands that are specific to Africa or to another location, or financial products that are only offered in a certain region, then yeah, that's not probably going to be something our product is strong at, and I haven't really seen the product that covers that.
Maybe you need to go international at some point. So I think it's through the chat. We had a question come through from Paulo Paso. Would you like to ask out loud, Paulo? I feel like I'm in high school getting ignored now. That's how, like the crickets, like response. How do you evaluate programmatic ads for newsletters? And do you think this is a good option? I feel like, I see a hand raised though. Hold up. Did you see that, Seth? Was that one of your hands, or is that somebody?
Yeah, that was Paulo raising his hand. I couldn't tell if that was for he wanted to come on and ask a question, or if that was just, hey, I had a question in the chat. Make sure to not overlook that.
Okay. So you add something to the chat if we have misinterpreted you, please. So programmatic ads for newsletters, do you think it's a good option? I think this was addressed earlier, but I'd love it to be reiterated.
Yeah, so I would say, generally speaking, no, I don't love it as an option. We at Ladders, we did use Live Intent, and I've dealt with Power Inbox. So, I have familiarity with both the main networks and products you see there. Look, they're trying to solve a problem that is a problem in the industry, in that there's a lot of small newsletters, or a lot of newsletters, and it's hard to buy across them. That said, it just tends to be, for the reader, I just think it is a junky looking experience. I'm always shocked that the New York Times runs them in their newsletters. I think that's like a kind of bizarre failure of ad sales there, to not sell directly on what are clearly huge newsletters. But it's easy, it's easier. They just stick in a code box and it serves ads. And for smaller newsletters especially, programmatic is going to yield no money, really very little money if you're under I mean, even at 100,000, it's going to be pathetic. You know, they really don't yield a lot per user. So if you're smaller, and that's the reason you're unable to sell your ads, programmatic is not going to solve your problem, because you're going to get just pennies while degrading the user's experience. So I'm pretty stridently don't love programmatic.
Okay.
Where it can work. Oh, I don't know if Paula wants to add.
We've got Paula.
Yeah. Well, let me see if there's one question.
Hi.
Welcome.
Hey,
Thank you for being the brave soul who came on to ask your question.
Okay. Congrats for the webinar. It's being very, very useful for me, and I think for most of the people who are here. I would like to complement something in the question, but I think you started to answer it, because I would like to, if you can, analyze why those big companies and newsrooms as New York Times, I think Washington Post also, are using those kind of tools, you know, for programmatic ads.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say, not having any direct familiarity with inside those newsrooms, but having spent my life at other newspapers and around media publishing decisions and how they interact with sales teams, my guess is it's mostly just a little bit of a failure to invest in the channel. I mean, if you are the New York Times running, you know, a ton of newsletters with really big audiences, you can definitely squeeze more revenue out of each of those by selling direct than you can by running live intent across the portfolio. What it is it's easier and it's less overhead to stick in a live intent box, and it means not having to staff up a full-time sales team with, you know, unproven whether they'll get results. Now, I think obviously it's been proven that there's a ton of value in email advertising. I mean, you have huge companies being built on email advertising, but I think the reason that, you know, that team didn't get built out 5 years ago is just that people, you know, a publisher has limited resources, and they're worried about going out and staffing up a 20-person sales team to go try and sell their newsletters. Now, honestly, they probably need a 3-person sales team, but I know how these publishers are. They would probably overstaff it and end up in the hole. But where it can work, what I was starting to say, you know, where these programmatic ads can work is honestly if you have a huge list and you just don't have the resources to hire that sales team, or you don't have the resources to improve the product. If you just have a big list and it's going to go out to, you know, 1 million, 2 million people one way or the other, and you can either have live intent or you can have nothing, then, you know, you stick live intent on there, and then maybe you start bringing in $500, $800 a day on a $1 million+ list, and that's better than not getting $500 or $800 a day. But if you're a 50,000 person, you know, size list email, you know, maybe you're going to be bringing in $50 a day or $50 a run, and is that worth it to give your users a terrible experience? You know, that's for everyone to decide, but not what I would recommend to a client.
All right. Any more questions coming in before we lose the brilliance of Ryan Sager? Okay. Sager? I can't remember. Sager.
You got it right.
Right. We had someone, Gilberto, start on our staff recently, and I have a very hard time. Oh, it's Gilberto. That's right. I have, like, it's the GIF, Gilberto, Gilberto. Like, there's a lot of G's in my life right now. Just giving people time to add any last second questions that they are thinking of. Would love to see you in the Slack community for this event. We are hoping it will live on and be active long after the event. You can join that. Seth is going to drop the link. And if you came in late, we also announced some of the contests that we have going on. So those will be available in the chat right here, right now. I'll leave the room open for just a few minutes, but you will not hurt my feelings if you go ahead and leave. We've had an amazing time talking about sponsorships today. I think some interesting conversations happened. And I I'm excited for the future of newsletter sponsorships, because I think as a marketer myself, I see intense value, and I, as a former journalist, like delight in the fact that writing for a specific audience, and advertisers knowing that that is a good place to put their money. I think that that's delightful, that we might have a resurgence of this true, like, they built the audience, they get rewarded for it system that cuts out a little bit of the duopoly that have been ruling us for a few years here. So all those links are dropped. Anyone who wants to click them now, because we're about to close out. And one last thank you to Ryan, and continue forward with Newsletter Fest. We'll see you at 12:30. We have Liz Willits, who's talking about copy. The title of her session is Copy is Everything. And after that, we have the people, Eric Barnes from the Daily Memphian, who's going to talk about how they have used newsletters to increase their subscriptions. Then we have Michael Aft, who at 3 will be talking about the new paper, which is a paid curated newsletter. He will be talking about his growth to a $1 million company over 2 years. And lastly, today is going to be me talking about newsletters as a service and how you can run like an agency model within Curated. So that is a branded conversation there. We will be talking generally about how to sell newsletters as a service, but then we will be diving into the software and demonstrating user permissions and what you can do. We did have an anonymous question come in, so I'm really excited that my droning on influenced someone. Would Ryan prefer to sell ads on a $100,000 newsletter audience with a 10% open rate, or a $20,000, see, I said dollar as well, 20,000 subscriber list with a 50% open rate?
Would you rather? Okay.
Yeah, I feel like this might have just become a drinking game.
Exactly. I think that the sort of politically correct answer is probably is 20,000 with a 50% open rate. I would say the real answer is 100%, 100,000 with a 10% open rate.
Ooh, explain that.
It's just easier to start the conversation when you have an audience of 100,000. Now, look, price it out CPC, it's probably the same rate, but it is always a little harder. You just look like a smaller fish, with the 20,000. So that's not to say chase scale at the expense of quality, but if you want to really be in the game, you're going to need to get scale at the end of the day. Again, all this being sort of general reach, if that 20,000 list is a B2B thing of startup founders, I probably like the 20,000. General interest, I want the 100,000.
Interesting. So that kind of goes back to the like choosing a big name university, or choosing this because of its credibility or something like that. Here is an interesting topic, because we aren't in the business of yet creating content around how to make choices as an advertiser when you're advertising in newsletters. And I feel like it's like an old game that is new again, or is always changing, etc. Do you have any recommendations? Because I always, when I'm trying to sell something, go try to get in the head of who's buying from me. Are there any sources for newsletter advertisers or marketing teams who are considering advertising in newsletters of the things that they should consider, and like a good resource hub for them? Or even just like one-off articles or things that give information?
Sure, it's a tough problem, and that's why we see so many companies entering the space. I mean, I've been on both sides of these transactions, and it is actually difficult to figure out, okay, I want to buy an email. I know email is a great channel. Where on earth do I buy an email? Probably the biggest directory as of now is probably Letterwell. I mentioned them earlier. Mm-hmm. The problem with newsletter discovery, right, is it's like Yahoo in 1996, right? It's people creating hand-curated lists of newsletters, which is exactly, I don't know how young our audience is here, but that's exactly what Yahoo, how they tried to like index the web at the beginning.
Seth does not understand what we're saying right
Google, so it took Google to come around and start using the hyperlink to click everything. Email does not have that solution yet. There's nothing at the ESP level that can scrape the available universe of newsletters, tell you what all their audiences are, and give you any usable information. So you really are relying on these hand-curated in both directions. People submit themselves, and they go out and try and add newsletters themselves. So Letterwell is a big one. You're seeing services like, I'll give a shout out to SwapStack. I don't know if we have either the Jakes from SwapStack here today. That is a two-sided marketplace where people try to match writers and creators join and sponsors join and try to create matches there. And they have a Slack that you can go into. And I believe there's a backend where you can kind of search for newsletters in your niche. So that I've definitely been seeing good user feedback on that from various newsletter Facebook groups that we're probably all in together. And then there's a Letterhead / Where by Us, which is another one that has another platform you can direct buy on their clients' newsletters. But again, this does all get left to like who has joined the network. And if you're trying to find somebody who doesn't happen to be on that network, you're not going to find them. So it's it can be tough, and we're going to see just a ton of development in these products in the next 5 years. And I think obviously a lot of people have seen this as a problem, and they're out there trying to solve it. But I've not seen a real solution yet.
True. And by the time there's a best practice, then you know it's reached a moment where something needs to zig or zag or whatever, because like by the time everyone realizes in marketing that this is a really smart play with your ad spend, then it's going to get more competitive, which is good for the newsletter creator. So if you are at 1,000 subscribers right now, don't shy away, because you are in a great position for as this escalates over the next several years, and resources like Ryan and what he is doing for clients, what he is doing with who sponsors stuff, should be like things you are almost watching like an addict in a way, so that you are prepared. It is a long-term investment, I think, building an audience. You've always got value if you've got people that you can sell something to, or that someone else can sell something to through you.
I'd encourage folks to join and submit themselves to these directories. I mean, basically, it's one of these things where it can't hurt. But yeah, if you want to get aggressive, you're going to need to get a sales tool and go out there and do selling, because otherwise people just don't know you're there, don't know if you have something for sale.
Excellent. All right, I think that is the end of the last minute questions. Thank you all so much for attending Newsletter Fest. This session is a wrap. Thank you, Ryan.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Ashley.
Bye.